I'm sorry, dude. It's been a long day. Okay? Like, your Thursdays are killer. So, Joel, this is Vancouver here. We're just here to, like, say hello to you all and, hear what you're all about. And, it's a good story from, what I've been up to the last couple, days and stuff, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, okay. Well, should we make this more of like a conversational style, or do you want me to present for a little while and then kind of open up for questions, or how do you want to, what's your preference?
Why don't you tell us what you're up to and what Swarm is all about? You know what I mean? And then we'll open up later. Just tell us about Swarm and what you're into.
Guys, I'm going to need you to be quiet here while I'm talking. So, so Joel Dietz, I had this idea for Swarm a while back when I realized the potential of these sort of Bitcoin 2.0 type protocol layers, and people were using the Bitcoin blockchain and related technology to do things like a kind of create a token that was secure and tradable and distributable. And I thought, there's a lot of really interesting things you can do with this potentially. And what I started doing is calling this crypto equity, which in some ways is to normal equity what cryptocurrency is to currency, which is to say it's kind of like currency, where Bitcoin isn't in some ways legally regulated as currency, but it has some of the same properties. And crypto equity may or may not be regulated as equity, but it has certain kind of additional feature sets that you don't find in like classical equity. And one of the kind of really interesting things about it is, in the normal sense of like equity or stock markets or this sort of thing, you have a sort of standard template. Like you have this idea is like, here's what a corporation is. This is something that was maybe decided, 70 years ago. This is like a company. And then you have certain rights that apply to it in the kind of legal system. So you have like you invest and you have like rights X, Y, and Z. So there's kind of like a template and like very established infrastructure for what that is, and that makes sense in the context of certain types of projects, but it's not very flexible. And in fact, the whole kind of regulatory and other framework around it isn't very flexible. And one of the things I discovered, and maybe some of you guys have similar sympathies to me, but I was working on certain things in the kind of collaborative realm that had a kind of communal feel to them. And one of the constant things that came up is that you had a certain group of people who were the investors and another group of people who were the users, and the investors always ended up with all of the control of it, while of the platform or whatever. Whereas the users, and particularly in anything that had a communal feel, were spending a lot of time and effort in like growing the platform and making it useful. But ultimately, kind of later on, their interests were not really maintained or cared for, and in particular, in something like something where there's high financial returns associated with it, those people didn't get any kind of share in that financial upside. So if you were an early user in Twitter, for example, and you spent a lot of time growing the network and all the kind of things like that, and then Twitter goes and IPOs and makes billions, those people didn't get anything back. So I thought this was this kind of fundamental problem out there that really needed solving, and that this whole crypto world was something that could potentially solve it. So we went and we originally actually had money offered to us by kind of like mainstream VCs and things like that, but we said if we're going to build a next generation crowdfunding platform, we really have to crowdfund it ourselves. And so we kind of put all the infrastructure together to do that, and we raised basically $1 million USD in our 30-day fundraiser. So we kind of got a pretty significant feedback from the people who have been involved in the Bitcoin world, and we're kind of endorsed by many of the major figures kind of working in this, who went out and kind of got Swarm coins. And the kind of way that works is we have our own coin, and like other sort of crypto equity, it has a kind of certain set of rights. So I said like crypto equity is a little more flexible. So and some of this is evolving because of the largely because of the legal implications of some of this stuff, because a lot of things that people, that provide a lot of value are regulated as securities, probably, and that there's huge costs of doing securities offerings legally, as well as the fact that, at least in the United States, you can't offer them to people who like make less than $200,000 a year, so or have some other kind of status. So there's really a huge barrier for like normal people to actually invest at all in an early stage. That the U.S. government actually passed some laws to fix, but they haven't been implemented because the people who are responsible for regulating are like taking an extra year or two beyond what they're supposed to. So we're kind of going in here, and with like our own coins, for example, we've allowed people to vote on the future of the platform. That's a really big deal. I think it's the first time that anyone did like a real distributed voting thing where everyone who has Swarm coins just could decide, how much we should, kind of raise and what kind, basically put out a proposal and people were able to vote on it. We're also doing kind of give backs for coins, so people can get coins back out of from other kind of things we launched through our platform. And we also give people who have Swarm coins early access to things, so they get kind of like, the pre-release of any kind of project that we're doing. So those are kind of like basically what we've offered people who participated in our fundraiser, and we're basically have the next bunch of projects that are ready to launch through Swarm all kind of lined up, and we're building the necessary infrastructure right now to make that a process that's seamless and easy and really good experience for everyone involved. So in that sense, like a lot of these Bitcoin technologies, as I'm sure some of you are aware, are not that easy to use. And so like if you wanted to have someone participate who isn't like a power user and really get some of the stuff, it would be quite difficult. So we're really trying to make that super accessible so people can raise, but also do it with their kind of own coins that have sort of custom rights attached. So that's the basic idea of what we're doing. We just set up this office here that you're seeing today. This is the day we moved in, so we just got our office set up here in Palo Alto, and we have a lot of really exciting projects that are ready to be kind of swarmed in the very near future. So we're just going to kind of push them out, and we're like really interested also in hearing ideas from other people about what can be done. So what you guys are excited about, and what can possibly be swarmed in the future. So that's Swarm in a nutshell, and I'm very happy to answer questions or kind of go into more detail on particular aspects.
Cool. So, what's been your latest? Who's been asking you for help, and who's been working with you towards crowdfunding?
We've seen a lot of projects that are doing things in this so-called Bitcoin 2.0 space that just need a little bit of a kickstart, but have a lot of engaged users that have Bitcoins already and kind of understand the technological advantages of what they're doing. So like going to a traditional investor and explaining what they're doing for someone who just doesn't understand the technological basis very well is a huge added cost. And if you can just go out to people in your little ecosystem and get them to fund it, it's just way better. And so that's one thing. We have some kind of other things that are more like promoting Bitcoin to a wider audience that we're planning to do. We have this kind of project that's sending nano satellites into space, which is pretty cool, and those are can potentially be controlled by the blockchain or have kind of special ability to run simulations in space on the Arduino chip and things like that. So that's basically, we really like kind of a little bit right now, kind of mainly techie, kind of and fairly ambitious projects that are kind of in the crypto world. But we're also looking at some kind of sexy projects like this sort of California Kale Collective that wants to make kale chips. And we've got some interesting engagement from people who would normally have done a Kickstarter project, but kind of like the feel of Swarm. You can see the added advantage of having voting or something like that, and just think that they'll raise more faster the kind of Swarm model than they would in Kickstarter. So that's we're kind of focusing right now on the ones that are a little more in the crypto space because that's where we started. But I think over time we'll see more people kind of migrating from the kind of Kickstarter who would have done Kickstarter and to start swarming.
Any questions from the room?
Yeah. Since it's built on counterparty, do you worry that it'll get less use to the extra barrier to entry?
Well, that's the interesting thing is, we have to issue we don't always have to issue all the tokens of counterparty. There is a possibility of doing other types of things like, I don't know if people who saw the Stellar launch. I'm thinking like Ripple model is a very interesting one, and they've kind of piggybacked off of that, doing like what I think the design of Ripple should have been from institutional layer. So, there's other options for us. So we're not like, obviously Ethereum has a lot of interesting features as well. So we can do other things. But regardless, even if we're just on counterparty forever, we don't actually have to, do everything in Bitcoin. So someone can get a counterparty token and a custom sort of Swarm wallet, and they can pay with US dollars or Canadian dollars or whatever else through any kind of wallet service, and then they just get the token, and they don't have to know the infrastructure of how it works, and that it's distributed and secure and all this kind of stuff. So really, like people should be able to pay in normal fiat money and stuff. That's not going to happen immediately. It's not like the #1 feature we're delivering, but I think it'll happen within the next couple of months.
With the amount you raised from the crowd sale, were you expecting more, or were you like, do you think you got a good amount?
I was hoping for more because then we can like have more of a legal sort of slush fund. I don't know, like Ethereum. I don't know. I actually used to run this in EtherCast, so I'm still running it, where we made like videos about smart contracts and things like that. And I interviewed Vitalik of Ethereum last week. And he said that they've already spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on legal fees before even launching Ethereum. So, we don't have hundreds of thousands of dollars to spend on legal fees to figure this stuff out before we do it. So really, we're focusing. We have enough to build the platform stuff, but and I guess theoretically, I guess we need enough to have enough money to pay off lawyers when there's an emergency large enough that it requires bringing lawyers in. Or either that or get some kind of legal people in-house that are really ambitious and know this stuff. But right now we have enough to build a platform and kind of continue to deliver in an agile way, which is really like, our goal, as the minimum was to do 1,000 Bitcoins. And we definitely exceeded that by a significant margin. It's always nice to have a little more runway, but our burn rate is adjusted out to take what we have now over like, 12 months or 14 months or something like that. So it's definitely good enough to build a kind of 1.0 product. It's just not enough to do like legal experiments and stuff. So we're going to basically have to raise more money to handle this stuff at some point.
Awesome. Yeah, questions? No, Alex, Alex, our go-to-man.
Is Swarm fully decentralized?
Is Swarm Coin decentralized? Is that the question?
The whole platform fully decentralized, or do you have to approve products that go on there?
Yeah, so this is an interesting aspect of our model. Right now, effectively, it is a kind of somewhat centralized model, and since we have a board right now that we set up in our office that has all the projects that people have contacted us with, and we kind of discuss them as a team. And this is mainly because the first couple of projects we have to be very, very hands-on and kind of, tailoring it to their needs and seeing exactly what features are the main priorities and what we can kind of push out. But the goal is to standardize that process and to have it as decentralized as possible. And one kind of really interesting aspect of that is to do a decentralized kind of due diligence system, where basically we even have a standard template for a product application now that's a little bit like a Y Combinator or other kind of application, and then other people from the Swarm coin holders or other people who are just involved in the Swarm would evaluate that and kind of give it a rating, and it would go through, and then it would get swarmed, if enough people give it like a good rating. And then the ideal thing is to have a reputational system as well, so you can see what rating people gave it in the past, and how well the people who rated it actually did at predicting future success of a particular project. So that's something that we're building towards. I think, realistically, we need to do a couple projects to kind of get it under our belt to see what the kind of major issues are in doing this in the because there are some really added advantages to doing it that way, clearly, but there's obviously some other kind of things that make it more tricky, from some to kind of like duplicate features of Kickstarter but add on some really interesting crypto stuff. But I think ultimately we're moving to have the whole major part of the infrastructure be decentralized, and there will probably always be some little bits of centralized elements as well. But I think that's inevitable for like usability purposes.
So then the follow-up would be, is anyone going to have a kill switch on a project that you don't like? Like, say I blatantly start like an illegal like drug operation and I want to crowdfund my like little army to take over a country, like blatantly illegal, and everyone approves the project in the community. Will you have a kill switch?
That's a good question, and we've discussed that a few times to handle that. I guess our goal is to have this kind of tiered system where multiple people kind of have to sign off on it or like it to a certain level, and that may not be us per se, but it has to be people who are kind of involved in the swarm in some way. So it is possible that at some point we'd have a system where people would just be able to push things through regardless of we personally like, or but obviously this isn't really like or not like in this case, something that is like 3D guns, maybe something that we think is really cool and we do like, but we don't think is like going to help us stay on the good side of the law or whatever it is we're trying to do at a particular point. So that is, I guess, to be determined exactly how the design works.
Well, I have a question, Joel. Where did you grow up, and where did you mature?
So I grew up in Philadelphia, and I spent the last 10 years basically living in a lot of different places across the world. So I lived in China for a while. I spent a long time studying sort of Eastern philosophy, and then when I thought I was good enough at Mandarin and classical Chinese, I moved to Japan and kind of made some minimal attempt at Japanese. And then the last couple of years I've been living in Europe. So mainly I started in Germany, and then I lived in Italy for a couple of years, and then kind of traveled back to Germany every so often for work. So and I also lived in a few other places. So I've spent a fair bit of time as a sort of, itinerant hacker, I guess you could say.
Cool.
Like learning languages along the way as well. So.
Nice. That's very good. Very good, sir. What do you see happening in the next 6 months in the crypto sphere, specifically with Bitcoin?
Well, one of the things I guess I'm excited about, maybe for a swarm, is a kind of decentralized Bitcoin foundation. I think one of the really interesting things that you can do with the really technology that already exists, but that we're making easy, is to do this kind of distributed voting. And in some ways it's like a proof of stake mechanism, but in a very easy way to vote on a particular issue and see like what do Bitcoin holders, how do they feel about for like what issues should be prioritized for a Bitcoin core or something like that. So right now, you have a couple core voters that are funded by the Bitcoin Foundation, which, as we all know, is not done the best job at either promoting Bitcoin or all this stuff. So I really would like to see a kind of better distributed, decentralized consensus mechanism for deciding how Bitcoin Core evolves, and particularly another important aspect to me personally is the kind of centralization of mining. I think it's one of the biggest systematic kind of risks to the long-term success of Bitcoin, and maybe one of the things that will ultimately push people to something else like Stellar or something if those issues can't be resolved. So if all the mining equipment in the world is produced in one city in China or something, then it's going to be a big problem for most of the world ultimately to be on the system.
Next question.
You mentioned that you have to be really picky about the first projects that you put on there. So what is the project that's actually closest to being launched that I can buy into?
So we're like super excited about this. We're super excited about the this thing, Bitcoin graphic novels. That's called the Hunt for Satoshi, and it's a way of basically explaining Bitcoin and kind of the process behind the generation of Bitcoin in a way that is very approachable to kind of normal audience. And I don't know. It's going to be coming on like a pre-sale, which is going to be available only to people with Swarm points. Because that's, like I said, people Swarm get early access to stuff. Will be coming online in the next couple of weeks. So we haven't announced the date officially, but it's going to be quite soon. And there is a kind of promo video for it that's floating online. I think it's probably linked to from bitcoincomic.org. Yeah. So you can kind of see that. I don't know. It's pretty exciting. Kind of step forward and educating people about how Bitcoin works.
Okay, so that was like a super non-technical thing. That was like a book. What about like technical projects that are coming up, like to do more with like Bitcoin or the crypto space?
Yeah, so we're working with, one of the things that we're using in the back end right now is this vending machine to do automatic asset generation. I don't know how familiar people are with Counterparty and how it works, but you have these distributed crypto tokens, but they're not like there's no automatic sort of vending of them out to people. And the way this works is you send in Bitcoin or some other asset to a particular address, and then the other asset is given back. So this is we're going to be doing a project with them that's swarming related. We have another one that's kind of an add-on to Store.j. MaidSafe has approached us about doing a kind of American pod for their project, or some kind of like additional add-on. And another one for like Hive Wallet, which is building out some mobile stuff around counterparty assets as well. So at the moment, most of them are looking in the kind of counterparty thing. We're also talking with other people like DERPA. We're doing this incentivized tour network. So there's basically a lot of different people who are doing stuff in the space that at least we're in dialogue with, and it's still like exactly when they get launched and in what order. I'm not sure, but I'm pretty enthusiastic about these kind of 2.0 technologies. And even like people working on Ethereum simulators or kind of some other like kind of smart contract related stuff. Expressed strong interest in women and projects. So it's really like across like all of these kind of new technologies.
So where is your company incorporating, and like would you consider going around like Ethereum days going to like Switzerland, or like do you have a planned country to launch from?
Yeah, I think there's partially because we're doing operations in the U.S. and Europe. There's a good chance the IP holding entity or whatever you want to call it, kind of top level legal entity is probably going to be one that's like fairly neutral from that standpoint, so not like clearly kind of in between those two. And then we're gonna we already have some kind of like operating entities. And I think ultimately our legal structure is going to be on the more complicated side, just because we have to be fairly resilient, and also we want to say if the SEC or U.S. government says you can't do this, or right now some of the stuff is so we don't really know exactly how the regulations are going to fall. Who knows? They could even say that the voting stuff that we're doing is illegal, which is kind of ridiculous, but it's possible to happen. But equity crowdfunding is legal in the UK, so we'll just say, okay, well, we're going to partner with someone there or set up our operations and do equity crowdfunding there, and just maybe in that case we open source or whatever, kind of have some easily distributable thing for people to just kind of do their own offering on their own, so they don't have to go through us or something like that. But we need to be fairly resilient with our legal structure as well. Although particularly the U.S. reaches out of the U.S. to anything that is potentially offering something to U.S. citizens. So you have to like block people from the U.S. It's just not something I'm excited about, but I'm certainly willing to do.
Cool. Hey, Alex, So you guys have got about 5 minutes left with Joel.
Yeah,
Anyway,
else?
we're gonna wind it down right now. Can we answer the last questions?
I just got one.
Yeah, go for it.
What legal problem are you most concerned about that you might face?
I'm concerned that just when cryptocurrency was getting started, there was this big danger that the legal authorities would just say cryptocurrency, it's currency, and we're just going to regulate it like money transmission and everything else that's currency. And they didn't do that, and that's why there's been so much growth and innovation around Bitcoin. So I think that was very wise for them to wait and see how things developed, and then develop kind of custom regulations as appropriate. Unfortunately, like things like New York now, they're giving these kind of blanket regulations that are really invasive and kind of awful. But and the same thing could happen with crypto equity. So it's possible that people will say, this is a totally new thing. It needs to be regulated as a new thing. Has this possibility of having due diligence embedded in the process. So it removes a lot of the risks that might be there in old securities offerings, and has a lot of customizability and kind of do this. So they take a kind of cautious, slow approach to it, see how it develops, and then kind of regulate it with that intent later on. Or they can just say, oh, crypto equity sounds like equity. It should be like in the same box that everything else is in, and then that would be very sad. I think for all the possible innovation that can happen in this space, and obviously we're kind of maybe pushing the first with this, and maybe the most momentum, but there's a lot of other people who are trying to innovate in this space as well, and it would be just kind of closing the door to it would be terrible from my standpoint.
Awesome. Joel, thank you so much for coming in tonight. We appreciate it very, very much. Everybody give Joel a round of applause.
Before I go, I'll just say hello to my other kind of co-founders here. So.
Hey, all right.
You guys.
Basically, that's what we've done. Almost. He only had to yell at us once.
Thanks a lot,
Guys.
Thanks, Joel. Cheers, man. Great branding, by the way.
Take care.